Mr. OD's on Facebook himself, Alan Glazier. We're really excited to have you. One thing I really want to get on today is really talking about staff. You know, staff, you hear it all the time, make or break you. They can get everybody in the door or run everybody out the door. But you've built a good practice and you've built a good staff. How do you know when you have those people? How do you recognize that and how do you keep them?
It's a secret to success for a lot of practices. Most practices having good people. So when you're starting out, this is something that you learn the hard way often. You hire people based on the standard ways you think you hire, and then you learn things about them and you realize that it didn't work out because of this, or this reason. And the next time you do it a little better, a little more carefully, a little more thought put into it. So, and even then, it's not a sure thing that the staff is going to work. And that's in a small practice, especially if there's just a few employees. And then one of the biggest lessons I learned the hard way, that it even took me many years to really implement, even though I knew it, was I call it pay attention to red flags. If somebody isn't working out, if they're not a good fit, if they're great in a lot of ways, but in one important way they're not, the chances are they're not going to change. They're adults, and they don't always learn. So my best advice for building a strong staff early on is pay attention to red flags, learn how to be comfortable moving staff around into different positions, identifying their strengths. Get rid of them if need be, because this is your business and you have a lot of staff and family and everybody that means a lot to you. And if you keep somebody around that drags you down, it's not good for anyone involved. That's the red flag thing.
Yeah, one toxic person can make the whole office toxic quickly.
That's right, and the opposite is true too. One really great person can build a culture of people around them. And then in my practice, for instance, we have a very, very strong, wonderful office manager, Kim, she's golden. Very intuitive, very smart. She understands people, and what she's been able to build with me is a culture where now when we bring somebody new into it, the staff almost weeds them out. You know, the staff will come to us and say they're not going to work with us because they're job proud and they love the place, their place, and it's their career. So ultimately, that's what you're going for. You're building a culture out of just a few people, and you want to keep that culture strong. And when it self-perpetuates like that, it's a great thing.
Yeah, how do, if you're starting out new or maybe in the early times in your practice and you've got that one or two employees and then you're ready to add on, how do you really navigate between the need for a new employee and settling sometimes for an employee that maybe isn't as good as what your practice deserves?
What people do and what they should do, I think, are two different things in that case. You know, I strongly would recommend changing them. But that's something that they have to decide to do and learn and realize that over time that that's the right way to do it. Settling is never a good thing in business in any way, because we're all trying to move the needle both professionally and financially and grow. And if somebody's holding you back, that just doesn't work at all.
So basically, it's a little better to work a little harder for a short period of time till you find that right person than to settle for the wrong one.
Yes, exactly. Sometimes you're in a situation where they have to go right away and be gone, and then you have to fill that space. And you may not have that kind of time, but it's still important to make the right decisions, absolutely.
So once you find a good person that you've worked with them, you're training them, they're getting where you want them to be, how do you really get them to buy into your practice, to that, like you said, family mentality where they actually have an investment and want the practice to succeed and care?
You always want to make people feel valuable and feel that they're needed, and compensate them at a level that makes them comfortable coming into work every day. You want to also make sure things like that they don't live too far away, because they may be happy with a lot of aspects, but if you hire somebody from too far away, they're going to commute for 6 months and say, I don't want this, no matter how good they are. So you really want to create an environment that is conducive to a friendly, stress-free workspace, and that's increases the odds they're going to stay for the long haul.
So day to day, I think some people talk about motivation in the way of bonuses or financial motivation, but day to day, that's not the real trenches. That's not what's keeping them there. So what would you say, as the OD, whether you're the owning OD or an associate in the practice, what's a way that you can really, contribute to that staff motivation each day in your practice?
People feel loved and rewarded and rightly in different ways. Some people it's financial. Other people respond to getting gifts. Other people respond to getting compliments, and so you have to have a good mix of those to make people feel that they're appreciated. It's not just about money. And if you're a boss who's just focused on money, you may feel that drives and motivates everyone. Have you heard of that book, The Five Love Languages? Anybody heard that? There's the five love languages of business too. And I think you can apply each of those. The way you feel rewarded in a relationship does go through to the way you feel rewarded and works.
I think you're absolutely right. It's, love is a universal thing, and there's a lot of reasons that there's different words for that concept, because you need to feel that not only in, the romantic way that a lot of people think, but in your life, no matter if it's work or home or whatever. So whether it's words of affirmation or gifts or whatever those may be, I think is a really smart way, but you have to learn your staff, right? You can't just look at them and be like, you're a words of affirmation guy, right?
Right. Very well. I'm telling people to do this. I'm not the greatest at that, but I'd say every 6 months or so, like I wake up and I'm like, I need to bring this employee in and just tell them how much I appreciate them. And I don't do it as much as I should, but just doing it at all, I think, that goes a long way with them.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's easy to remember when you need to reprimand someone, but sometimes the time goes by quickly when you're trying to praise, because you get in, you get busy, and everybody's going and trying to put out fires, and those things fall through the cracks.
And don't forget, what we're talking about here, staff management, also known as HR, is the hardest part of any business. It's also often the most the worst part of any business. It's the thing that creates the most stress for you, the most anxiety. Dealing with people is not easy.
Sometimes you hear people say, be friendly with your staff, but not friends with your staff. Thoughts?
Yes. So, yes, absolutely. When I have historically had young docs that work for me, and those young docs are the same age as the receptionists. They're the same age as the technicians, and they forge friendships, which is fine, but they're also the doctors. And those friendships sometimes extend outside of the office, and sometimes they result in conflict. And that can be a big problem, especially things have happened at our office through office parties where alcohol's flowing, the docs are engaging in that same way. And it's just, you really have to put a wall between that as a professional doctor. The staff, it's good to be friends with them at arm distance, but I wouldn't necessarily in every practice recommend connecting on social media or going out at night with their friends and stuff. It can only lead to bad things generally. Our office happens to have a good culture that way, but I'm not saying that something bad couldn't happen.
I think a lot of ODs, unfortunately, do that, and then they end up, maybe the relationship between them and the friend doesn't go bad, but then someone else starts to think preferences are being had, or, somebody's getting more than they're getting because it's, friendship out of the office.
Exactly.
Yeah. So when you start to recognize that maybe your staff motivation's dipping a little bit, where do you start? How do you get it back?
In any situation where something is underperforming in your office, you have to try and get to the source of it. And you talk to the office manager, you try and get some competitive intelligence around your own business, and then you work through it. If it's staff underperforming, you have review. So quarterly reviews, give people a chance to bring their game up. They may not even realize it. They may have personal things they're bringing in from home. It's all about how the culture, how they drive each other. And in a really good culture, their colleagues will notice that maybe they're not as happy or maybe something else is going on and help them. And in a poor culture, it may result in a lot of resentment between people and catty things happening and a further decline in customer service and things like that. So again, strong office manager with good personal skills who's able to really observe what's going on and gets a second sense of the employees so that when something is wrong, they can tackle it or you need to move on.
When you do realize that it's time to, as I've heard some say, free up their future, where do you, how do you make that happen and still preserve the motivation? Because obviously at that point you have an open position, so now the rest of your staff's going to have to step up and pull a little more weight, at least temporarily. How do you have that conversation with your staff that keeps them on board with this is the best decision for all of us?
Well, for me, my staff at this point knows that we're going to try and find a good fit. Right now, we know what a good fit is, and we just have to look. People have to have expectations that during the time, especially if somebody quits or is fired and you don't have time to replace them with notice and everything, they have to pick up extra slack. And you can reward them, take them out to dinner, do something, and let them know that they're team players. You need to be a team player right now because if you're in the situation was reversed, you'd want the same done for you. And give the new person a chance. We went through we had great employees in our practice, but they would act more like fraternity brothers and require new employees to pledge, to show that they had thick skin or whatever, and that was really unhealthy for a while. And we identified that, and we mitigated that problem, but it was an interesting personality thing that went on that we fixed.
Yeah, especially when you get a tight-knit group of people and someone new is coming into that, there can be a little bit of, for lack of a better term, hazing. Exactly.
It's no joke. It's weird, but it's no joke.
Yeah, but you're right. When they get all together and it's their family, they're protective of that, and they don't want to see it go. From the doctor perspective, when you are missing that role, do you think it's important for the doctor to step up and maybe pull a little more weight themselves to kind of lead by example, or?
I think that happens automatically. So if you have a doctor leave, everybody's schedules get busier, and but it can only get so busy and it gets pushed out. I think that's how that kind of fills and takes care of it. So it's not like the doctors are going to work an extra day to see the extra patient. That's not needed. You just have to fill that space so that you don't get so far behind that your customer service suffers or people are turned away because they have to wait too long.
So you mentioned you bring in young ODs and into your practice, and sometimes they are around the same age as employees. How do they need to go about, making sure that they establish that respect, from doctor to staff, but also understand that, make themselves a team player as well?
No, it's very important when establishing respect with everybody that you show people the same respect that you expect back. So it doesn't go very far for a doctor to come in with their nose in there acting like a doctor is better than anybody else. And we don't hire that kind of people anyway, but that can be difficult. If a doctor snaps at an employee more, repeatedly, if they're rude to them or demanding, it makes them feel insufficient, and that can create a tension that's no good for anybody. And unfortunately, that happens. I won't tolerate that, and when I hire people, I tell them what's expected of them in terms of treating the employees that care about the practice like they're a part of the practice, not beneath them. The staff that surrounds an OD feels a lot of the time that the OD is just above them educationally and professionally, and you don't need to push that any more than it already exists.
Yeah, I think sometimes young ODs, not because they're trying to come off with their nose in the air, they may go in with good intentions, but they feel like because they're young, they somehow have to have a more standoffish attitude to get that respect, and that's just not true for a good staff member anyway.
They're not. Your staff will underperform for you if you don't treat them well, and they'll overperform for you if you treat them well. Fit it in that equation, and you can't do wrong.
And whether you're being friends or not, we do sometimes favor just personality-wise or whatever, one person over another in the staff. How do you make sure that as an OD or as a manager that you're not showing that you're not playing favorites, that you're not garnering that kind of atmosphere?
I don't know what to tell you about that. I just say don't do it, and maybe talk to the office manager and tell me if you see any favoritism. Please point it out to me so that I can, because I may be doing it unknowingly. Or for instance, if you have several doctors and you share a sense of humor with one doctor, you're always joking around with that doctor. The other doctors may take that as you're favoring them. You're not necessarily. You just connect on that level, or maybe you have a hobby that one of the other doctors have, and you do something with them and not with everybody else. It's not necessarily that you're favoring them, but it can come across that way. And people's feelings are real about that, whether you mean it or not. So you have to just be cognizant of it. As an owner of a practice, you have to keep yourselves at arm's length from your doctor employees as well as your staff. Warmth and respect are important, but there's a distance that needs to be established, especially because you may have to let them go, and it's not easy to do if you're too close.
Definitely. What would you say is the best way to start training staff? Of course, depending on the role, it's going to be a little different, but as far as the overall, way of the practice, what's the best way to get them on board, they're diving into a new role, so they're already probably a little overwhelmed, but how do you guide that to become a good employee and not a stressed out, ready to leave one?
That is a great question, and it's fundamental because it all boils down to your culture. You're supposed to establish a culture, and then everything that happens in your practice should fit within that culture. So if you don't have a culture like that and a manager who can understand and help expand that culture to the rest of the practice, it's not a good equation for success. It also should be in writing in the office policy manual, and it should be reiterated again and again and again for people what is expected in terms of their behavior so that it fits within the culture of the practice. And every practice might have a different type of culture, but that the culture is, there are books, excellent books on culture, and I strongly suggest anyone who's opening a practice read a book about business culture.
Yeah, I think practices that struggle the most are the ones that don't necessarily know what their culture is, or they do and they wrote it down once 10 years ago and haven't really revisited that since. You know, people want to be a part of something, but if they don't know what that something is, they can't be a part of it.
That's right.
So.
That's right. And it may be alien to them.
Right.